For more stories like these, go to www.social-tv.co.za, subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on our social mediums.
Ericsson and the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, announced a global partnership to help map school connectivity in 35 countries, including South Africa, and that's by the end of 2023. We find out about mapping the connectivity landscape for schools and how it will create access to digital learning opportunities for every child. I chat to Samana Sakar, who's Head of Sustainability and Corporate Responsibility at Ericsson for Middle East and Africa. You're listening to our social newscast with me, Sam Marshall. Talk to us about this partnership and why Ericsson was the very first of the communication platforms to put their hand up and say, we want to be part of this.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, first of all, Sam, for the question and your time today. So, as you have heard, of course, that Ericsson and UNICEF recently we announced a 3-year global partnership, which will basically help map school connectivity in 35 countries by the end of 2023. So it's a 3-year partnership. Ericsson's commitment is twofold. Giga per se, of course, stands for nothing in particular, but it is what was launched by UNICEF and ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, during September 2019. And Ericsson, we are quite proud that we are the first company to make this multi-year, multi-million-dollar commitment to this initiative, but it must be said and noted that Ericsson's commitment or support is purely within one of the Giga pillars, which is to map school connectivity. So the internet connectivity landscape for schools in these 35 countries, that is what Ericsson is supporting. And why this partnership and, why Ericsson would choose to perhaps take on this as compared to many of the other things that we do is it's a great fit and a match given Ericsson's focus towards sustainable development goals in general, our commitment to bridging the digital divide through access, affordability, connectivity. So this still stays squarely within the connectivity pillar, so to speak, and that is what our support is going to enable with a combination of how we are supporting Giga for school connectivity mapping, and then also our commitment in kind, which is by way of committing resources for data engineering and data science to accelerate the school connectivity mapping in these 35 countries. And then, of course, with our customer base and an extensive one at that, we will engage with them to further advance Giga's mission.
What is the scope of this mapping? And I can use South Africa as an example. The South African government has got a project that is already looking at connectivity within rural communities. And of course, that means that schools in rural communities will be connected. We know that corporate companies, not obviously on Ericsson's scale, is rolling out fiber in communities. So what's the scope of this mapping and connectivity? And will you be looking at existing programs? Will that feature as part of that end report?
Sure. So the idea is that, mapping connectivity status will help, of course, governments and the private sector to then design and deploy digital interventions, which in turn will support uninterrupted learning for children and young people. Now, you spoke about South Africa. Maybe good to mention that while you have heard that this exercise will be conducted in 35 countries, and these are countries that were selected by UNICEF and ITU, and very often in consultation with the national governments. We are yet to zero in on exactly the list of all 35 today, because things are developing very fast, especially with the pandemic, etc. So which means that the commitment or the agreement with UNICEF and Ericsson is such that by the end of this year, 2020, we will have finalized the first list of 10 and then followed by the rest in 2021. And a large number of these countries, at least 10 out of the 35, are expected to be in Africa. So how does this complement maybe other initiatives such as the one that you mentioned? You're absolutely right. There are several initiatives, local or national, in nature. And there is also, of course, some of those exercises have resulted in having a view on the connectivity status of rural areas. So Ericsson will specifically assist with the collection, the validation, analysis, monitoring, and visual representation of real-time school connectivity data. So if you could envision that as a decision maker, you have this map in front of you that opens up and not only points to school locations, but also gives you at a click a glance of what is the internet connectivity situation in, let's say, those 20 schools in a particular district. Is it 10 Mbps? Is it less? So this is what we are enabling as part of, as I said, the in-kind commitment towards GIGA using our data science resources. So Ericsson has a global artificial intelligence capacity, of course, as being a telecom and technology company of our size. And we are going to, our colleagues in that are going to work towards making this happen.
You talked about 10 countries on the African continent, and South Africa already being one of them. The other countries that are selected globally, this in actual fact is a global mapping exercise in terms of school connectivity. How important is the selection of that countries to the aim of this undertaking with UNICEF? Because South Africa, of course, strategically makes sense because it is a very well-developed country on the continent. It has, on its good days, a stable government. There are infrastructure that's been developed in line with global standards. And there are other countries on the continent that tick some of those boxes. How important is the selection of that countries to portray a very progressive plan in terms of connectivity in those 35 countries in this global survey?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, that it's expected that at least a third or 10 out of these 35 are likely to be based in the continent of Africa. And we hope to arrive at a final list of at least the first 10 out of those 35 by the end of this year. But it is not, let's say, Ericsson per se that has selected or finalized this list. This list has evolved from an understanding of the gap, or where the needs are. So for example, we are of course talking now in the context of Africa because that is let's say a topic of our common interest today. But the other spread out of the 35 are in Latin America, Caribbean, so forth, also Central Asia. So which means that the consideration for GIGA itself, or UNICEF and ITU, has been to bring connectivity or improve the connectivity in schools in countries where this is seen as a problem. And of course, GIGA per se is going to have other components, but all of those components begin with having stable internet connectivity, let's say. And Ericsson's involvement is to the extent of this pillar, which is to map school connectivity. But yes, I agree with you that in terms of making an impact where one is most needed, the selection of the countries is pivotal.
Obviously, Ericsson is a global player. UNICEF is a very important organization globally as well. When you do something like this, do you need buy-in from governments? Because hopefully at the end of it, as you started it, as you alluded in the beginning of our conversation, that this is going to be information that countries will have access to, and then will be able to map or direct their projects in line with some of these insights that will be derived out of this mapping exercise. Do you know, and I know it's a very difficult question directed at you because you're only a partner in it, but do you know if there is relationships with governments to say that once this is done in 2023, that you will have access to it and that we gently advise you to really understand what the connectivity issues are within your country? Do those relationships exist?
Yeah, I think definitely those relationships exist, and they exist in different ways and through different channels, I would say. I mean, both, as you said, Ericsson is global, and in order to set up telecom infrastructure in all countries in which we have business, both the telecom regulators and governments are important stakeholders for us. And then we have our relationships mapped out with them, which will also be the case in these 35 countries. And same goes for UNICEF. The mode in which UNICEF works is essentially with pretty much the departments and the ministries of education. And now that education and ICT is so interlinked, you could say the ministries of education and ICT is who UNICEF primarily works with. And similar for, again, the International Telecom Union. Members on that are really high-level representatives of government positions in most countries. So there is between this consortium, and I just mentioned the three because this is the part where we are involved through the GIGA first pillar, but GIGA itself being larger than that, there is, of course, a great role that the governments have to play right from the start. And even if I look at then what is it that we can hope to come up with, or what we want to achieve with what Ericsson is contributing towards this, when you do have this fantastic data visualization at hand, which, as I said, we very much hope that this is a tool that governments will then use to address the connectivity gap, which in their case would also mean designing policies that enable that to happen maybe quicker. And also very relevant in the context of the time in which you and I are speaking today, with education being disrupted in a way that kids who go to school otherwise are also at home. And then we know that the connectivity status really varies in countries like these, where not all internet users have internet access from home. Many use it at school. So how do we make sure that you have, these broad statistics from ITU itself that says 53% of the world's population probably used the internet in 2019, and this was 17% up if we had to look at a figure 10 years ago. So this, of course, all helps us understand how access at schools fits into this, where the gaps are. And we should hope that, again, a similar statistic now that we talk about the digital divide all the time, right? That the proportion of people using the internet is not distributed evenly. We all know this and we talk about it, but the figure was more than 82% in Europe and just 28% in Africa as recently as 2019. So we are very convinced that this is not an easy problem to solve, and that is why we are making a start here in contributing to the first and the pivotal pillar, which is to map the connectivity status itself, I would say.